Let's talk about our musical selection for the day before we get into the story. Today we are getting all tied up in my headphone cables. Everything's just crazy here. Guess I didn't get enough rest this weekend or something. Yes, we're going to get into some more Tchaikovsky. And this time, this is from Symphonic Treasures, album number 3. I've played 2 other records from this collection so far during this reading. But we're on album number 3 now. I think the one I played last time was album number 15, for those of you keeping track. This is, side 1 is Capriccio Italian, and side 2 is the Romeo and Juliet Fantasy Overture. So there we go. It's Tchaikovsky from Symphonic Treasures. So let's get that going and get into the story. Cheers. And we begin with the Millennium Falcon just having escaped from the Imperial Battle Station, aka the Death Star. Darth Vader strode into the control room, where Governor Tarkin stood staring at a huge, brilliantly lit screen. It displayed a sea of stars, but it was not the spectacular view which absorbed the governor's thoughts at the moment. He barely glanced around as Vader entered.
"Are they away?"
the Dark Lord demanded. "They've just completed the jump to hyperspace. No doubt they are at this very moment congratulating themselves on their daring and success." Now Tarkin turned to face Vader, a hint of warning in his tone. "I'm taking an awful chance on your insistence, Vader. This had better work. Are you certain the homing beacon is secure aboard their ship?" Vader exuded confidence beneath the reflective black mask.
"There is nothing to fear. This will be a day long remembered. It has already seen witness to the final execution of the Jedi. Soon it will see the end of the Alliance and the Rebellion."
Solo switched places with Chewbacca, the Wookiee grateful for the opportunity to relinquish the controls. As the Corellian moved aft to check the extent of the damage, a determined-looking Leia passed him in the corridor. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Solo inquired, well pleased with himself. "Not a bad bit of rescuing. You know, sometimes I amaze even myself." "That doesn't sound too hard," she admitted readily. "The important thing is not my safety, but the fact that the information in the Artoo droid is still intact." "What's that droid carrying that's so important, anyway?" Leia considered the blazing starfield forward. "Complete technical schematics of the battle station. I only hope that when we get there, the data is analyzed and a weakness can be found. Until then, until the station itself is destroyed, we must go on. This war isn't over yet." "It is for me," objected the pilot. "I'm not on this mission for your revolution. Economics interests me, not politics. There's business to be done under any government, and I'm not doing it for you, Princess. I expect to be well paid for risking my ship to save your hide." "You needn't worry about your reward," she assured him sadly, turning to leave. "If money is what you love, that's what you'll receive." On leaving the cockpit, she saw Luke coming forward, and she spoke softly to him in passing. "Your friend is indeed a mercenary. I wonder if he really cares about anything, or anybody." Luke stared after her until she disappeared into the main hold area, then whispered, I do. I care." Then he moved into the cockpit and sat in the seat Chewbacca had just vacated. "What do you think of her, Han?" Solo didn't hesitate. "I try not to." Luke probably hadn't intended his response to be audible, but Solo overheard his murmur. "Good." Still, Solo ventured thoughtfully. "She's got a lot of spirit," to go with her sass. "I don't know, what do you think? Is it possible for a princess and a guy like me?" "No," Luke cut him off sharply. He turned and looked away. Solo smiled at the younger man's jealousy, uncertain in his own mind whether he had added the comment to bait his naive friend or because it was the truth. Yavin was not a habitable world. The huge gas giant was patterned with pastel high-altitude cloud formations. Here and there, the softly lambent atmosphere was molded by cyclonic storms composed of 600 kilometers per hour winds, which boiled rolling gases up from the Yavinesque troposphere. It was a world of lingering beauty and quick death for any who might try to penetrate to its comparatively small core of frozen liquids. Several of the giant planet's numerous moons, however, were planet-sized themselves, and of these, 3 could support humanoid life. Particularly inviting was the satellite designed by the system's discoverers as number 4. It shone like an emerald in Yavin's necklace of moons, rich with plant and animal life, but it was not listed among those worlds as supporting human settlement. Yavin was located too far from the settled regions of the galaxy. Perhaps the latter reason, or both, or a combination of causes still unknown, had been responsible for whatever race had once risen from Satellite 4's jungles, only to disappear quietly long before the first human explorers set foot on this tiny world. Little was known of them, save that they left a number of impressive monuments, and that they were one of many races which had aspired to the stars, only to have their desperate reach fall short. Now, all that remained were the mounds and foliage-clad clumps formed by jungle-covered buildings. But, though they had sunk back into the dust, their artifacts and their world continued to serve an important purpose. Strange cries and barely perceptible moans sounded from every tree and copse. Hoots and growls and strange mutterings issued from creatures content to remain concealed in the dense undergrowth. Whenever dawn broke over Moon the 4th, heralding one of its long days, an especially feral chorus of shrieks and weirdly modulated screams would resound through the thick mist. Even stranger sounds surged continually from one particular place. Here lay the most impressive of those edifices, which a vanished race had raised toward the heavens. It was a temple, a roughly pyramidal structure so colossal that it seemed impossible that it could have been built without the aid of modern gravitonic construction techniques. Yet all evidence pointed only to simple machines, hand technology, and perhaps devices, alien and long lost. With the science of this moon's inhabitants had led them to a dead end as far as off-world travel was concerned, they had produced several discoveries which in certain ways surpassed similar Imperial accomplishments, one of which involved a still unexplained method of cutting and transporting gargantuan blocks of stone from the crust of the moon. From these monstrous blocks of solid rock, the massive temple had been constructed. The jungle had scaled even its soaring crest, clothing it in rich green and brown. Only near its base in the temple front did the jungle slide away completely to reveal a long, dark entrance cut by its builders and enlarged to suit the needs of the structure's present occupants. A tiny machine, its smooth metal sides and silvery hue incongruous amidst the all-pervasive green, appeared in the forest. It hummed like a fat, swollen beetle as it conveyed its cluster of passengers toward the open temple base. Crossing a considerable clearing, it was soon swallowed up by the dark maw in the front of the massive structure, leaving the jungle once more in the paws and claws of invisible squallers and screechers. The original builders would have never recognized the interior of their temple. Seamed metal had replaced rock, and poured paneling did service for chamber division in place of wood. Nor would they have been able to see the buried layers excavated into the rock below, layers which contained hangar upon hangar, linked by powerful elevators. A land speeder came to a gradual stop within the temple, whose first level was the uppermost of those ship-filled hangars. Its engine died obediently as the vehicle settled to the ground. A noisy cluster of humans waiting nearby ceased their conversation and raced toward the craft. Fortunately, Leia Organa quickly emerged from the speeder, or the man who reached it first might have pulled her bodily from it. So great was his delight at the sight of her, he settled for giving her a smothering hug as his companions called their own greetings. "You're safe! We'd feared you'd been killed." Abruptly, he composed himself, stepped away from her, and executed a formal bow. When we heard about Alderaan, we were afraid that you were lost among the rest of the population. All that is past history, Commander Willard, she said. We have a future to live for. Alderaan and its people are gone. Her voice turned bitter cold, frightening in so delicate looking a person. We must see that such does not happen again. We don't have time for our own sorrows, Commander, she continued briskly. The battle station has surely tracked us here. Solo started to protest, but she shut him up with logic and a stern look. That's the only explanation for the ease of our escape. They sent only 4 TIE fighters after us. They easily could have launched 100. Solo had no reply for that, but continued to fume silently. Then Leia gestured at R2. You must use the information locked in this R2 droid to form a plan of attack. It's our only hope. The station itself is more powerful than anyone suspected. Her voice dropped. If the data does not yield a weakness, there will be no stopping them. I have an aside here. This is the third time in this novel that Leia has referred to something as our only hope. In her most famous one from the movie, Ben Kenobi, you're my only hope. In the book, she says, you're my only remaining hope. I can't remember what the second thing was. I guess maybe that was her catchphrase. You're my only hope. Luke was then treated to a sight unique in his experience, unique in most men's. Several rebel technicians walked up to Artoo Detoo, positioned themselves around him, and gently hoisted him in their arms. This was the first, and probably the last time he would ever see a robot being carried respectfully by men. Theoretically, no weapon could penetrate the exceptionally dense stone of the ancient temple, but Luke had seen the shattered remains of Alderaan and knew that for those in the incredible battle station, the entire moon would present simply another abstract problem in mass energy conversion. Little Artoo Detoo rested comfortably in a place of honor, his body radiating computer and data bank hookups like a metal hairdo. On an array of screens and readouts nearby, the technical information stored on the sub-microscopic record tape within the robot's brain was being played out. Hours of it, diagrams, charts, statistics. First, the rush of material was slowed and digested by more sophisticated computer minds. Then, the most critical information was turned over to human analysis for detailed evaluation. All the while, C-3PO stood close to R2, marveling at how such complex data could be stored in the mind of so simple a droid. The central briefing room was located deep within the bowels of the temple. The long, low-ceiling auditorium was dominated by a raised dais and huge electronic display screen at its far end. Pilots, navigators, and a sprinkling of R2 units filled the seats. Impatient and feeling very out of place, Han Solo and Chewbacca stood as far away from the stage with its assemblage of officers and senators as possible. Solo scanned the crowd, searching for Luke. Despite some common sense entreaties, the crazy kid had gone and joined the regular pilots. He didn't see Luke, but he recognized the princess as she talked somberly with some bemedaled oldster. When a tall, dignified gentleman with too many deaths on his soul moved to stand by the far side of the screen, Solo turned his attention to him, as did everyone else in the room. As soon as an expectant silence had gripped the crowd, General Jean Dudana adjusted the tiny mic on his chest and indicated the small group seated close to him. I like that he might be wearing a regular lavalier mic. You all know these people, he intoned with quiet power. They are the senators and generals whose worlds have given us support, whether open or covert. They have come to be with us in what may well prove to be the decisive moment. He let his gaze touch many in the crowd, and none who were so favored remained unmoved. The Imperial Battle Station you now all have heard of is approaching from the far side of Yavin and its sun. That gives us a little extra time, but it must be stopped once and for all, before it can reach this moon, before it can bring its weaponry to bear on us all as it did to Alderaan. A murmur ran through the crowd at the mention of that world, so callously obliterated. The station, Dodonna went on, is heavily shielded and mounts more firepower than half the Imperial fleet. but its defenses were designed to fend off large-scale capital ship assaults. A small 1 or 2-man fighter could be able to slip through its defensive screens. A slim, supple man who resembled an older version of Han Solo rose. Dodonna acknowledged his presence. "What is it, rebel leader?" The man gestured toward the display screen, which showed a computer portrait of the battle station. "Pardon me for asking, sir, but what good are our snub fighters going to be against that?" Dodonna considered. "Well, the Empire doesn't think a one-man fighter is any threat to anything except another small ship, like a TIE fighter, or they would have provided tighter screens. Apparently, they're convinced that their defensive weaponry can fend off any light attacks. But an analysis of the plans provided by Princess Leia has revealed what we think is a weakness in the station's design. A big ship couldn't get near it, but an X or Y-wing fighter might. It's a small thermal exhaust port. Its size belies an importance, as it appears to be an unshielded shaft that runs directly into the main reactor system powering the station. Since this serves as an energy outlet for waste heat in the event of reactor overproduction, its usefulness would be eliminated by particle shielding. A direct hit would initiate a chain reaction that would destroy the station. Mutterings of disbelief ran through the room. The more experienced the pilot, the greater his expressed disbelief. "I didn't say your approach would be easy," Dodonna admonished them. He gestured at the screen. "You must maneuver straight in down this shaft, level off in the trench, and skim the surface to this point. The target is only 2 meters across. It will take a precise hit at exactly 90 degrees to reach the reactor systemization, and only a direct hit will start a complete reaction." I said the port wasn't particle shielded. However, it is completely ray shielded. That means no energy beams. You'll have to use proton torpedoes. A few of the pilots laughed humorously. One of them was a teenaged fighter jockey seated next to Luke, who bore the unlikely name of Wedge Antilles. Artoo Detoo was there also, seated next to another R2 unit, who emitted a long whistle of hopelessness. "A 2-meter target at maximum speed? With a torpedo?" Antilles snorted. "That's impossible, even for a computer." "But it's not impossible," protested Luke. "I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters. "Is that so?" the rakishly uninformed youth noted derisively. "Tell me, when you were going after your particular varmint, were there 1,000 other, what did you say you called it, womp rats, armed with powerful rifles firing up at you?" He shook his head sadly. "With all that firepower on the station directed at us, this will take little more than barnyard marksmanship, believe me." As if to confirm Antilles' pessimism, Dodonna indicated a string of lights on the ever-changing schematic. "Take special note of those emplacements. There's a heavy concentration of firepower on the latitudinal axis, as well as several dense circumpolar clusters. Also, their field generators will probably create a lot of distortion, especially in and around the trench. I figure that maneuverability in that sector will be less than 0.3. This produced more murmurs and a few groans from the assembly. "Remember," the general went on, "you must achieve a direct hit. Yellow squadron will cover for red on the first run. Green will cover for blue on the second. Any questions?" A muted buzz filled the room. One man stood, lean and handsome, too much so, it seemed, to be ready to throw away his life for something as abstract as freedom. "What if both runs fail? What happens after that?" Dodonna smiled tightly. "There won't be any after that." The man nodded slowly, understandingly, and sat down. "Anyone else?" Silence now, pregnant with expectation. "Then man your ships, and may the force be with you." Like oil draining from a shallow pot, the seated ranks of men, women, and machines rose and flowed toward the exits. And let's take a quick break and flip our record over. Elevators hummed busily, lifting more and more deadly shapes from buried depths to the staging area and the primary temple hangar as Luke, 3PO, and Artoo Detoo walked toward the hangar entrance. Neither the bustling flight crew, nor the pilots performing final checkouts, nor the massive sparks thrown off as power couplings were disconnected captured Luke's attention at the moment. Instead, it was held by the activity of two far more familiar figures. Solo and Chewbacca were loading a pile of small strongboxes onto an armored landspeeder. They were completely absorbed with this activity, ignoring the preparations going on all around them. Solo glanced up briefly as Luke and the robots approached, then returned to his loading. Luke simply watched sadly, conflicting emotions careening confusedly off one another inside him. Solo was cocky, reckless, intolerant, and smug. He was also brave to a fault, instructive and unfailingly cheery. The combination made for a confusing friend, but a friend nonetheless. "You got your reward," Luke finally observed, indicating the boxes. Solo nodded once. "And you're leaving then?" "That's right, kid. I've got some old debts to pay off, and even if I didn't, I don't think I'd be fool enough to stick around here." He eyed Luke appraisingly. "You're pretty good in a scrap, kid. Why don't you come with us? I could use you." The mercenary gleam in Solo's eyes only made Luke mad. "Why don't you look around you and see something besides yourself for a change? You know what's going to happen here. What they're up against? They could use a good pilot, but you're turning your back on them." Solo didn't appear upset at Luke's tirade. "What good's a reward if you're not around to spend it? Attacking that battle station isn't my idea of courage. More like suicide." "Yeah, well, take care of yourself, Han," Luke said quietly, turning to leave. "But I guess that's what you do best, isn't it?" He started back into the hangar depths, flanked by the two droids. Solo stared after him, hesitated, then called, "Hey, Luke! May the Force be with you." Luke looked back to see Solo wink at him. He waved, sort of. Then he was swallowed up by moving mechanics and machinery. Solo returned to his work, lifted a box, and stopped to see Chewbacca gazing at him. "What are you staring at, Gruesome? I know what I'm doing. Get back to work." Slowly, still eyeing his partner, the Wookiee returned to the task of loading the heavy crates. Sorrowful thoughts of Solo vanished when Luke now saw the petite, slim figure standing by his ship, the ship he had been granted. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Princess Leia asked him. "It could be a deadly reward." Luke's eyes were filled with sleek, venomous metal shape. "More than anything." "Then what's wrong?" Luke looked back at her and shrugged. "It's Han. I thought he'd change his mind. I thought he'd join us." "A man must follow his own path," she told him, sounding now like the senator. "No one can choose it for him. Han Solo's priorities differ from ours. I wish it were otherwise, but I can't find it in my heart to condemn him." She stood on tiptoes, gave him a quick, almost embarrassed kiss, and then turned to go. "May the Force be with you." "I only wish," Luke murmured to himself as he started back to his ship, "I only wish Ben were here." So intent was he on thoughts of Kenobi, the princess, and Han, that he didn't notice the larger figure which tightly locked onto his arm. He turned, his initial anger gone, instantly in astonishment as he recognized the figure. "Luke!" the slightly older man exclaimed. "I don't believe it. How'd you get here? Are you going out with us?" "Biggs!" Luke embraced his friend warmly. "Of course I'll be up there with you." His smile faded slightly. "I haven't got a choice anymore." Then he brightened again. "Listen, I've got some stories to tell you." The steady whooping and laughing the two made was in marked contrast to the solemnity with which the other men and women in the hangar went about their business. The commotion attracted the attention of an older, war-worn man known to the younger pilots only as Blue Leader. His face wrinkled with curiosity as he approached the two younger men. It was a face scorched by the same fire that flickered in his eyes. A blaze kindled not by the revolutionary fervor, but by years of living through and witnessing far too much injustice. Behind that fatherly visage, a raging demon fought to escape. Soon, very soon, he would be free to let it loose. Now he was interested in these two young men, who in few hours were likely to be particles of frozen meat floating about Yavin. One of them he recognized. Aren't you Luke Skywalker? Have you been checked out on the Incom T-65? Sir, Biggs put in before his friend could reply. Luke's the best bush pilot in the Outer Rim territories. The older man patted Luke reassuringly on the back as they studied his waiting ship. Something to be proud of. I've got over 1,000 hours in an Incom Skyhopper myself. He paused a moment before going on. I met your father once when I was just a boy, Luke. He was a great pilot. You'll do all right up there. If you've got half your father's skill, you'll do a damn sight better than all right. Thank you, sir. I'll try. There's not much difference control-wise between an X-Wing T-65, Blue Leader went on, and a Skyhopper. His smile turned ferocious, except the payloads of a somewhat different nature. He left them and hurried toward his own ship. Luke had 100 questions to ask him, and no time for even one. I've got to get aboard my own boat, Luke. Listen, you'll tell me your stories when we come back from this, all right? All right, I told you I'd make it here someday, Biggs. You did. His friend was moving toward a cluster of waiting fighters, adjusting his flight suit. It's going to be like old times, Luke. We're a couple of shooting stars that can't be stopped. Luke laughed. They used to reassure themselves with that cry when they piloted starships over sandhills and dead logs behind the flaking pitted buildings of Anchorhead years and years ago. Once more, Luke turned toward his ship, admiring its deadly lines. Despite Blue Leader's assurances, he had to admit that it didn't look much like an Incom Skyhopper. Artoo Detoo is being snuggled into the R2 socket behind the fighter cockpit. A forlorn metal figure stood below, watching the operation, and shuffling on nervously.
Hold on tight,
C-3PO was cautioning the smaller robot.
You've got to come back. If you don't come back, who am I going to have to yell at?
For 3PO, the query amounted to an overwhelmingly outburst of emotion. R2 beeped confidently down at his friend, however, as Luke mounted the cockpit entry. Farther down the hangar, he saw Blue Leader already set in his acceleration chair and signaling to his ground crew. Another roar was added to the monstrous din filling the hangar as ship after ship activated its engines. In that enclosed rectangle of a temple, the steady of thunder was overpowering. Slipping into the cockpit, Luke studied the various controls as ground attendants began wiring him via cords and umbilicals into the ship. His confidence increased steadily. The instruments were necessarily simplified, and as Blue Leader had indicated, much like his old Skyhopper. Something patted his helmet, and he glanced left to see the crew chief leaning close. He had to shout to be heard above the deafening howl of multiple engines. That R2 unit of yours seems a little beat up. Do you want a new one? Luke glanced briefly back at the secured droid before replying. Artoo Detoo looked like a permanent piece of the fighter. Not on your life. That droid and I have been through a lot together. I'll secure R2? The droid replied with a reassuring beep. As the ground chief jumped clear, Luke commenced the final checkout of all instruments. It slowly occurred to him what he and the others were about to attempt. Not that his personal feelings could override his decision to join them. He was no longer an individual, functioning solely to satisfy his personal needs. Something now bound him to every other man and woman in this hangar. All around him, scattered scenes of goodbyes were taking place. Some serious, some kidding, all with the true emotion of the moment masked by efficiency. Luke turned away from where one pilot left a mechanic, possibly a sister or a wife, or just a friend, with a sharp, passionate kiss. He wondered how many of them had their own little debts to settle with the Empire. Something crackled in his helmet. In response, he touched a small lever. The ship began to roll forward, slowly, but with increasing speed, toward the gaping mouth of the temple. And thus concludes Chapter 11. Chapter 12. Leia Organa sat silently before the huge display screen on which Yavin and its moons were displayed. A large red dot moved steadily toward the fourth of those satellites. Dodonna and several other field commanders of the Alliance stood behind her, their eyes also intent on the screen. Tiny green flecks began to appear around the fourth moon, to coalesce into small clouds like hovering emerald gnats. Dodonna put a hand on her shoulder. It was comforting. The red represents the progress of the Imperial Battle Stations as it moves deeper into Yavin's system. Our ships are all away, a commander behind him declared. A single man stood alone in the cylindrical hold, secured to the top of a rapier-thin tower. Staring through fixed-mount electro-binoculars, he was the sole visible representative of the vast technology buried in the green purgatory below. Muted cries, moans, and primeval gurglings drifted up to him from the highest treetops. Some were frightening, some less so, but none were as indicative of power held in check as the four silvery starships, which burst into view above the observer. Keeping a tight formation, they exploded through humid air to vanish in seconds into the morning cloud cover far above. Sound shadows rattled the trees moments later in a forlorn attempt to catch up to the engines which had produced them. Slowly assuming attack formations combining X and Y-wing ships, the various fighters began to move outward from the moon, out past the oceanic atmosphere of giant Yavin, out to meet the technological executioner. The man who had observed the byplay between Biggs and Luke now lowered his glare visor and adjusted his half-automatic, half-manual gun sights as he checked the ships to either side of him. Blue boys, he addressed his internship pickups. This is Blue Leader. Adjust your selectors and check in. Approaching target at 1.3. Ahead, the bright sphere of what looked like one of Yavin's moons, but wasn't, began to glow with increasing brightness. It shone with an eerie metallic glow, utterly unlike that of any natural satellite. As he watched the giant battle station make its way around the rim of Yavin, Blue Leader's thoughts traveled back over the years, over the uncountable injustices, the innocents taken away from interrogation and never heard from again, the whole multitude of evils incurred by an increasingly corrupt and indifferent imperial government. All those terrors and agonies were concentrated, magnified, represented by the single bloated feat of engineering they were approaching now. This is it, boys, he said into the mic. Blue 2, you're too far out. Close it up, Wedge. The young pilot Luke had encountered in the temple briefing room glanced to starboard, then back to his instruments. He executed a slight adjustment, frowning. Sorry, boss. My ranger seems to be a few points off. I'll have to go on manual. Check, Blue 2. Watch yourself. All ships, stand by to lock S-foils in attack mode. One after another, Luke and Biggs, Wedge, and the other members of the Blue Assault Squadron, the replies came back. Standing by. Execute, Blue Leader commanded, when John D. and Piggy had indicated they were in readiness. The double wings on the X-Wing fighters split apart like narrow seeds. Each fighter now displayed 4 wings, its wing-mounted armament and quadruple engines now deployed for maximum firepower and maneuverability. Ahead, the Imperial Station continued to grow. Surface features became visible as each pilot recognized docking bays, broadcast antenna, and other man-made mountains and canyons. As he neared the threatening black sphere for the second time, Luke's breathing grew faster. Automatic life support machinery detected the respiratory shift and compensated properly. Something began to buffet his ship, almost as if he were back in his skyhopper again. Wrestling with the unpredictable winds of Tatooine, he experienced a bad moment of uncertainty until the calming voice of Blue Leader sounded in his ears. We're passing through their outer shields. Hold tight. Lock down freeze floating controls and switch your own deflectors on. Double front. The shaking and buffeting continued, worsened. Not knowing how to compensate, Luke did exactly what he should have, remained in control and followed orders. Then the turbulence was gone, and the deathly cold peacefulness of space had returned. That's it. We're through, Blue Leader told them quietly. Keep all channels silent until we're on top of them. Doesn't look like they're expecting much resistance. Though half the great station remained in shadow, they were now near enough for Luke to be able to discern individual lights on its surface. A ship that could show phases matching a moon. Once again, he marveled at the misplaced ingenuity and effort which had gone into its construction. Thousands of lights scattered across its curving expanse gave it the appearance of a floating city. Some of Luke's comrades, since this was their first sight of the station, were even more impressed. Look at the size of that thing, Wedge Antilles gasped over his open pickup. Cut the chatter, Blue 2, Blue Leader ordered. Accelerate to attack velocity. Grim determination showed in Luke's expression as he flipped several switches above his head and began adjusting his computer target readout. Artoo Detoo re-examined the nearing station and thought untranslatable electronic thoughts. Blue Leader compared the station with the location of their proposed target area. Red Leader, he called toward the pickup. This is Blue Leader. We're in position. You can go right in. The exhaust shaft is farther to the north. We'll keep him busy down here. Red Leader was the physical opposite of Luke's squadron commander. He resembled the popular notion of a credit accountant, short, slim, shy of face. His skills and dedication, however, easily matched those of his counterpart and old friend. We're starting for the target shaft now, Dutch. Stand by to take over if anything happens. Check, Red Leader, came the other's reply. We're going to cross their equilateral axis and try to draw their main fire. May the Force be with you. From the approaching swarm, 2 squads of fighters broke clear. The X-Wing shapes dove directly for the bulge of the station, far below, while the Y-Wing shapes curved down, northward, over its surface. Within the station, alarm sirens began mournful, clangorous wail as slow to react personnel realized that the impregnable fortress was actually under organized attack. Admiral Mati and his tacticians had expected the rebels' resistance to be centered around a massive defense of the moon itself. They were completely unprepared for an offensive response consisting of dozens of tiny snub ships. Imperial efficiency was in the process of compensating for this strategic oversight. Soldiers scrambled to man enormous defensive weapon emplacements. Servo drivers thumbed as powerful motors aligned huge devices for firing. Soon, a web of annihilation began to envelop the station as energy weapons, electrical bolts, and explosive solids ripped out at the oncoming rebel craft. This is Blue 5, Luke announced to his mic as he nosedived his ship into a radical attempt to confuse any electronic predators below. The gray surface of the battle station streaked past his ports. I'm going in. I'm right behind you, Blue 5, a voice recognizable as Biggs sounded in his ears. The target in Luke's sights was as stable as that of the Imperial defenders was evasive. Bolts flew from the tiny vessel's weapons. One started a huge fire on the dim surface below, which would burn until the crew of the station could shut off the flow of air to the damaged section. Luke's glee turned to terror as he realized he could swerve his craft in time to avoid passing through the fireball of unknown composition. Pull out, Luke! Pull out! Biggs was screaming at him, but despite commands to shift course, the automatic pressers wouldn't allow the necessary centrifugal force. His fighter plunged into the expanding ball of superheated gases. Then he was through and clear to the other side. A rapid check of the controls enabled him to relax. Passage through the intense heat that had been insufficient to damage anything vital, though all 4 wings bore streaks of black carbonized testimony to the nearness of his escape. Hellflowers bloomed outside his ship as he swung it up and around in a sharp curve. You all right, Luke? Came Biggs's concerned query. I got a little toasted, but I'm okay. A different stern voice sounded. Blue 5, warned the squadron leader. You'd better get yourself more lead time, or you're going to destroy yourself as well as the Imperial construction. Yes, sir. I've got the hang of it now, Luke. Like you said, it's not exactly like flying a skyhopper. Energy bolts and the sun-bright beams continued to create a chromatic maze in the space above the station, as the rebel fighters crisscrossed back and forth over its surface, firing at whatever looked like a decent target. 2 of the tiny craft concentrated on a power terminal. It blew up, throwing lightning-sized electric arcs from the station's innards. Inside, troopers, mechanicals, and equipment were blown in all directions by subsidiary explosions as the effects of the blast traveled back down various conduits and cables. Where the explosion had hulled the station, escaping atmosphere sucked helpless soldiers and droids out into the bottomless black tomb. Moving from position to position, a figure of dark calm amid the chaos, was Darth Vader. A harried commander rushed up to him and reported breathlessly, "Lord Vader, we count at least 30 of them, of two types. They are so small and quick the fixed guns cannot follow them accurately. They continuously evade the Predicators. Get all TIE fighters."
We'll have to go out after them and destroy them ship to ship.
Within numerous hangars, red lights began flashing, and an insistent alarm started to ring. Ground crews worked frantically to ready ships, as flight-suited Imperial pilots grabbed for helmets and packs. "Luke," requested Blue Leader as he skimmed smoothly through a rain of fire, "let me know when you're off the block." "I'm on my way now. Watch yourself," the voice urged over the cockpit speaker. "There's a lot of fire coming from the starboard side of that deflection tower." "I'm on it, don't worry," Luke responded confidently. Putting his fighter into a twisting dive, he sliced once more across metal horizons. Antennae and small protruding emplacements burst into transitory flames as bolts from his wingtips struck with deadly accuracy. He grinned as he pulled up and away from the surface as intense lines of energy passed through space recently vacated. Right there at the end of that page, I think is, with the end of our record, is a good time to break. And let's pick this back up tomorrow.